Instead of bringing things back up on the porch, we thought we'd just assemble things in place. Karen had a good idea. What we did over at the other end is we just held the 4x4 behind the 2x10 and screwed it in, and then it wasn't as hard to kind of hold things in place over on this side. And we did our same procedure, drill, countersink, and then screwed the screws in with this, and so they're countersunk in there. Everything's lined up. We're going to have a little extra space at the bottom to sink those 4x4s and just in the dirt a little bit. That should help stabilize things. So, fronts on, sides on, we're rolling.
So here's Rick working on the support piece for the bed.
And you know, this support piece probably isn't necessary, but because we're not sinking this in cement this time, we figured if these 4x4s are tied together, that's just going to add a lot of solidity and stability. So, so these are at each 8 feet out, and even just because we like to be thorough, so we're going to put some other posts 4 feet out, you know, halfway out of this 8-foot span, and then use this 2x3 piece near the bottom to tie that together, and that'll also just add a real lot of extra stability. And again, probably not critical, but it's an awful lot easier than digging holes and mixing cement and putting the 4x4s in cement. So this is going to be extra solid and stable. Cool. Now it's easy. Hey, so I got the top ones lined up on each side, so the space is the same. It's a little, this piece is a little above the bottom of the 2x10, and now I'm going to put a bottom screw on each side. There we go. Good support piece. Okay, it's about a half hour later, not even maybe, and we've made some good progress here. You can see we got all the sides on. And what we did out on this side is, well, you saw me doing that before, putting the 2x4 support piece across the 4x4s. And then, like we said, we put a 2x3 across there just to be extra solid. And, you know, sometimes you have to figure things out as you go along. We've got markers where we were originally going to come all the way out to this point. But, you know, we've got some space against the house, and sometimes we need to store some stakes or some tomato cages or some rock dust if it's not going to rain too much. You can actually see where there's a line between the dark soil and the light soil, and the light stuff stays, you know, we got an overhang over the house that keeps that area dry. So in any case, this extra little triangle that you see on in the camera right there is about, you know, maybe 5 heads worth of something green like lettuce. Why inhibit storage and walking around for like 4 or 5 extra heads? Didn't seem to make sense. So in any case, we're going to go ahead and cut some more 4x4s, and probably the trickiest part is going to be this last piece, figuring out the miter angle at that side and the miter angle at this side to make it look sharp and all fit. But that is the new plan, and we're going to keep going. So as you can see, we have another 4x4 post that we attached to the end of this 12-foot span. And now for the tricky part. So now we got to figure out, we're going to have our side piece come out from here, but it'll come in a little ways from our pavers there. And then from there, it's going to head over here parallel to the pavers over to this piece. So we're thinking we're probably going to come straight out That'll be 90 degrees. We'll come straight out, sink another post here, and then this piece that's at an angle, we're going to have to miter it at this end and at the other end. And we haven't quite figured out how long this piece is going to be and how we're going to miter things. So we brought out some of our other 2x10s here, and we're going to kind of space things together and take some measurements and see how we can figure it out to keep things nice and clean. So that's where we are right now. So you can see that we now have this side piece on and it attached to its 4x4. And actually we did that last night. It was starting to get dark, and you know, we had to eat dinner because we were hungry, so it's the next day now. And again, now for the tricky part. Now we've got a span across here, but we've got an angle at each end. So the first thing we did is we took our piece that's going to go across here, laid it on the top, and then drew a line at the bottom of each side to get the right angle. But then we thought, you know, if we mess that up, it's back to the store to get another piece and put all the oil on there again. So we have this test piece that we're probably going to use as a cross brace, so we'll be able to you know, cut some extra off and use it as a cross brace. And what we did is we angled this at each end. And what we found was for this end that's going to go here, we used about a 39-degree angle. After several cuts of trial and error, we actually found a protractor to measure the mark that I made on the bottom that we used to use to analyze our chiropractic patients' x-rays. So we got a 39-degree angle there, had to do a little trial and error to get that right. And then for this end, we don't know what angle it is at this end. It's more than 45 degrees, and our miter saw only goes up to 45 degrees. So we had to get a little bit creative in order to lift one side of this board up to get more than a 45-degree angle when we cut. But in any case, this piece is still a little bit longer than it needs to be, but we've pretty much got it nailed at each end. And now that we've done this with the test piece, we're going to recreate the exact same thing, exact same angles with our actual piece, and put that across, and the basics of the bed will be done. So here's how we got more than a 45-degree angle for this end of this particular piece that we're putting on. What we did is we set the saw at 45 degrees, that's as much as it can go, and then we put extra spacers up here to angle it so we get more than a 45-degree cut. And we took our test piece and cut it several times until we got the angle just right, you know, maybe 6 or 8 trial and errors. And now that we have it just right at both ends, we're going to go ahead and cut our actual piece just the same way. And if all goes according to plan, it'll fit just right. Admittedly, that was probably about 2 hours worth of going to the saw, coming back, going to the saw, coming back. Even once we got our test piece that we just mentioned all set, we really wanted to get this just right. And our motto we kept thinking with our motto, you can always take more off, you can't add more back. So we just kind of kept checking, cutting a little more. Sometimes we changed the angle of the saw just a little bit. And now we pretty much nailed it at each end. And there's some sticking out, but we're just going to sand off the rest. So we're to the point where we just need to assemble this, screw it into the posts, sand it down for a finishing touch, and the bed will be assembled. After that, then we've got to get the irrigation hooked up, and of course fill it all up with compost and the other stuff, the rock dust and all, and we'll be ready to plant. And there we have it. Last piece in place. And you know, we hadn't even thought about it. We're so, you know, so specific about getting the angle just right. We didn't even realize until we started screwing it in that there's a little flexibility in this joint, which means this part could move in and out a little bit. So we actually when I put this screw in, the gap here closed a little bit because it pulled it in, and then I was banging this down to adjust the spacer below to mush the mud down, and this thing moved a little, and we thought, oh my gosh, okay. So anyway, we just moved this, so we got a little tiny seam there. And when we screwed this in, we had a little seam, but then it just closed that gap, and I don't even barely need sanding now. It's almost perfect. So we're going to put one more cross piece in, and the bed will be complete. So as you can see, we flipped this whole thing up. It was pretty easy to do, and it's leaning against the house. And then we dug out the holes where the posts are. For this one, though, we ran into a little bit of a challenge. I stuck the shovel in there and started coming on up, and you could see the whole ground flex. And as it turns out, we've got some irrigation pipes. These aren't the ones we put in. This is what the previous owner of the house put in. They're not far below the surface, and it looks like the bottom of this would hit that. So we've got to cut a piece off here. And you know, my first thought was, okay, portable circular saw, go right through here. But the biggest one I have, the deepest it goes is 2 3/8. So I could cut it there, and then I could use a hand saw for the rest. And that was the plan. But then we just thought, you know what, why don't we make it easy? Why don't we just get out the chainsaw? The chainsaw is, of course, not normally recommended for cutting lumber, but we can do it all in one shot instead of having to get the handsaw out and spending a lot of time here. And in fact, just the other day, I had this thing fired up helping a neighbor with some tree work, so yeah, I think it's the best tool for this situation. That was pretty easy. So it was an easy cut, but it did leave some ragged edges, as you can see here, because again, chainsaws aren't designed for lumber. So we're just going to kind of sand this off with some coarse grit sandpaper. That should do the trick. And then, of course, no matter what kind of saw we used, we've now exposed the wood. So we're going to use our Penafin Verde again, but instead of getting the paintbrush out just for these little odds and ends, and we did it with the cut ends of our corner pieces, we're just going to take the rag and slather a bit of that on there. And that'll help this wood last longer without rotting out, being underground and wet for a lot of its life. The posts are sunk here. You can see this extra support piece that I put in across there, and we had to dig a few trenches around the outside for the 2x10s to go down a little bit lower to get everything level. And what we've done here, you can kind of see around the perimeter, we took some of our clay adobe soil that's real goopy, and not along this side, because we're going to take that off to dig the irrigation ditch in to put a valve right in the center here, and then that's going to help us load the wheelbarrow, get the wheelbarrow in there to load up the compost. But then along that front edge there on the inside at the bottom, you can see we lumped up a bunch of adobe soil and packed it down really tight, because what we found in the bed we put in the first year is we didn't do that, and some of the water would seep out underneath. And on this bed we did it right. That was our second year. But what would happen, because that's right up against the lawn, the water would seep out from underneath, and when I ran the lawnmower right next to the bed, the wheel on the bedside would be sloshing through water, and it's a real pain. And then when I'd come with the string trimmer, it would be wet over there, and I'd get mud splattered all over me, which isn't the worst thing in the world, but if we could avoid water leaking, that's of course better. So in any case, we're all pretty well packed in there, and now it's time to dig our irrigation through that area and go ahead and go over to our compost pile and fill this thing up.